Hey guys, tonight, we're traveling somewhere warm, wet, and wonderfully tangled into the misty courtyards and winding corridors of ancient Vietnamese palaces. You're barefoot naturally. Your silk robe is sticking slightly to your shoulders from the monsoon humidity, and someone is offering you a bowl of jasmine-scented tea that's just a little too hot to hold. You can hear the rustle of woven palm fans, the low thunk of a bronze gong, announcing another imperial meeting, and above all, the delicate flurry of servants flitting about, trying to protect elaborately dressed royals from the rain with clunky, oversized bamboo umbrellas. And no, you probably wouldn't survive this world, not just because of the royal politics or the absence of coffee, but because your hair alone would disqualify you from polite society. That unruly side part, absolutely scandalous. That messy bun, please. A disheveled hairstyle could result in banishment, demotion, or worse, a stern letter from your mother. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And don't forget to tell me where you're watching from and what time it is. I love seeing how far this sleepy little channel reaches. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You arrive in the imperial court of Jai Viet, circa the Li dynasty, somewhere between the 11th and 13th centuries, where hair isn't just hair. It's identity hierarchy and cosmic balance, all rolled into one gloriously high-maintenance package. Every strand you see has been combed, oiled, twisted, and judged. Royal women teeter under updos that are architectural feats. Imagine a beehive met a crescent moon and had a child made of lacquer and pearls. The base is twisted into multiple knots, each named after something poetic, like dragon coil, or the river's sigh, and then adorned with combs made from ivory horn, or in one tragic case, a rather confused turtle shell. And it rains. Constantly. Not that romantic mist either. We're talking sheets of tropical rain that turn palace walkways into slippery noodle slides. Court ladies scurry about arms up, trying to shield their hair towers with fans and bits of silk, while stern-faced eunuchs glare at the sky, like they have a personal vendetta against clouds. The royal barbers here are no mere hairdressers. They're practically sorcerers required to master not only the tools of their trade, hand-carved combs, beeswax paste, and smoked hairpins, but also the intricate customs and symbolism associated with each hairstyle. That casual knot worn low behind the ear, off-limits unless you've given birth to a male heir. That triple loop twist with the silver swan pin reserved for lunar festivals, or days when your horoscope reads auspicious for water spirits. Historians still argue whether the emperor himself had a hand in approving certain hairstyles. Some ancient records suggest there was a small chamber off the main hall, filled with hairstyle samples on ceramic busts. Apparently, he'd walk through once a month and say things like, too puffy, or this makes Aunt Lynn's neck look weird. And if you think beauty routines are long, today, imagine sitting on a lacquered stool for 6 hours while your hair is coiled and lacquered with natural resin. There's a very real chance you'd fall asleep mid-process, which is why some palace salons employed musicians to play slow, repetitive melodies on a monochord to keep their clients gently alert. Picture an ancient ASMR session, but with more gongs. Oh, and don't even think about coming to court with your hair out of order. In one widely whispered case from the Tran dynasty, a lower noblewoman's hair accessory slipped during a court banquet. The emperor reportedly paused, Mid-rice bite raised an eyebrow, and the woman was quietly reassigned to a remote rice harvesting outpost by sundown. They say she grew excellent lotus roots, though, but not all of this was about beauty. Some styles were designed to echo celestial balance, mirroring the moon, the rivers, or the symmetry of a carp's tail. It was believed that when your hairstyle harmonized with the elements, your thoughts would flow more clearly and your words would be better received. Whether it worked or not, we can't say. But it's a good excuse for why your jokes never land on Zoom. Calls your buns simply isn't in sync with the moon phase. The courtiers also had this custom of gifting strands of hair between friends. Not locks strands. A few hairs tied with silk thread and hidden in a pouch. It was a sign of trust, apparently, although to modern eyes it might just scream, "I have a shrine to you behind my bookshelf." Still, everything in the palace moved with the rhythm of rain and hair. Bamboo mats were rolled out with care. Hairpins clinked like tiny wind chimes as women bowed. Courtiers passed one another in long corridors, like drifting ships, each trailed by a cloud of scented oil and whispered judgment. And you're quietly trailing behind your own borrowed updo, tugging gently at your temples, wondering if the soft splash of footsteps behind you is an approaching lady-in-waiting, or just another fish who got lost in the flooded hallway. You're still wandering through the palace, though now the rain has let up, and golden sunlight is beginning to seep through the bamboo latticework. The smell of wet stone and blooming frangipani hangs in the air. And just ahead, under a banyan tree, whose roots have claimed half the walkway, you spot a scene you might have overlooked had you not been moving so slowly, half lulled by your surroundings. It's a group of young royal children, sitting cross-legged on low rattan mats. A nursemaid hums softly as she parts and combs each tiny head of hair. You pause, careful not to make a sound, because what you're witnessing isn't just a cute moment, it's a centuries-old rite of passage. In ancient Vietnamese dynasties, especially during the Le and Tran periods, childhood grooming was about more than keeping little heads tidy. It was sacred preparation. The first haircut, known as the tok jai thang, full-month hair, usually happened when a baby reached 1 month old. And let's be honest, it was also a bit of a family power move. That single snip was accompanied by gifts, elaborate altars, and if you were royal an astrologer, who would check your geosin birth hour to determine whether your hair should be grown long and thick or trimmed to avoid drawing too much celestial attention. Historians still argue whether these early grooming choices actually shaped one's destiny or simply followed a prevailing belief in aesthetic feng shui. Some records suggest that children with cowlicks on the left were deemed stubborn and often given amulets to temper their rebellious scalp spirit. Imagine that a toddler accused of political tendencies based on hair whorls. Now here's where it gets delightfully strange. You'd think royal children would be spared the usual indignities of childhood grooming, but no. There were detailed rituals for how to scrub behind the ears, using water infused with citron leaves, how to anoint the scalp with scented oils at lunar intervals, and how to dry the hair without insulting the ancestral spirits in the wind. No blow dryers, obviously just careful towel dabbing, and occasionally sun exposure, with large silk parasols held overhead by extremely bored attendants. And if you were a young girl in the line of succession, good luck. Your grooming involved the painstaking braiding of tiny sections into what was called tok chim anan, or swallowtail strands. These were meant to mimic the swoop of birds in flight and indicate agility of mind. Not that agility would help you escape the marathon hair session. You'd have to sit still for hours, as your hair was twisted and pinned into shapes that looked suspiciously like the imperial seal from above. You lean in closer to the banyan scene. One little boy, maybe 5, is sulking dramatically. His attendant tries to distract him with a carved bird whistle, but he's having none of it. He's been told that his new crown braid marks his status as a future mandarin, and he is extremely unamused. His sister, on the other hand, looks positively smug, her hair wrapped in a spiral that resembles a coiled dragon. You can almost hear her thinking, "I win." It wasn't all peaceful, though. As you peek behind the tree, you see another young royal being marched off for the dreaded lice inspection. Yes, even in ancient palaces, lice were the great equalizer, and the tools, a fine-toothed comb made of buffalo horn, and an herbal paste that smelled vaguely of fermented tamarind and something your nose can't quite place. Lice lacquer, they called it. Fancy branding for a problem as old as time. The palace kept dedicated grooming quarters for children, separate from adult salons. These rooms were decorated with painted cranes and lotus motifs, and always smelled like camphor and rice water. Little wooden stools were arranged in semicircles, and the walls were lined with scrolls, bearing poems meant to soothe fidgety kids. Some were gentle moral lessons, hair like reeds, thought like water, still thy head, young prince. Others were vaguely threatening, disrespect the comb, and you dishonor your mother. Of course, not all children conformed. There's a famous case of a boy nicknamed Little Tangle, who reportedly refused to have his hair brushed for 3 years. He hid under beds, climbed onto roofs, and once even bribed a cat to distract the attendants. Eventually, the emperor, his own grandfather, declared the child a symbol of ungovernable spirit and had his tangled locks immortalized in a small sculpture, now lost to history. Or maybe eaten by termites. Either way, it became palace legend. And that's the thing, children's hairstyles weren't just about cleanliness. They were seen as indicators of internal harmony, family status, and even regional loyalty. A child with a north wind braid might be from a noble family in the Red River Delta. A fringe shaped like a peach blossom, probably tied to a maternal ancestor, from the hills of Nagayan. You ease away from the banyan shade, now walking slowly, feet sinking slightly into the wet earth. Overhead, birds chirp lazily, and the hush of the palace settles back around you. Somewhere behind the children resume their giggling, braiding, and complaining. You can't help but smile. After all, even in royal dynasties built on Confucian rigidity and endless rules about posture etiquette and incense angles, some things like kids hating hair day never change. You've wandered deeper into the palace now, away from the banyan tree and its squirming, freshly combed children. The sounds here are hushed, muffled by thick embroidered tapestries and the steady rhythm of water dripping from ceramic gutters. You pass under a carved archway into what seems to be a preparation room for court appearances. There's a faint smell of sandalwood and scorched silk, and in the center of the room stands a table laid out with a confusing array of tools, combs, oils, powders, and something that looks suspiciously like a flattened squirrel tail. A court lady nods to you silently, inviting you to sit. You do, because it's not like you have a meeting to attend, and soon she begins lifting and examining your hair as if it were a priceless artifact, which in her world it very much is. See, in ancient Jai Viet society, the hair on your head wasn't just your own. It was a public declaration, a political billboard, and a literal weight you carried with every step. Nowhere was this truer than among the royals and nobility. Their hairstyles were less about personal expression and more about signaling rank loyalty, recent promotions, or even spiritual states. You could tell a woman's palace standing from the number of loops in her chignon. A single twist, assistant record keeper. 4 loops, plus a silver lotus hairpin. That's the emperor's second cousin, twice removed. And don't you dare make eye contact. One of the most visually striking elements was the use of hair ornaments, intricately carved pieces, tucked into the hair to hold its shape, and more importantly, tell anyone watching exactly who you were. The materials mattered. Jade was for the inner circle. Gold was ostentatious, and used sparingly unless you were the queen, or terribly nouveau riche. Bone, yes. Bone was reserved for funerals, or dramatic poetry readings. And if someone had a comb made from polished chicken bone, that usually meant they'd just been dumped or demoted. Think of it as the historical equivalent of a messy breakup haircut. Historians still argue whether certain materials, like pearl-inlaid hairpins, were standard across dynasties, or specific to certain royal factions. What's clear is that the palace had strict inventory systems. Every hair ornament had to be checked in and out, with a detailed scroll, noting where it had been worn by whom, and on what occasion. Lose your silver crane comb at a poetry banquet. That's a 3-day lecture from the head of adornments, and possibly a dock in salary, and don't even try to fake your rank with a borrowed ornament. There's a widely circulated anecdote from the 14th century about a low-ranking noblewoman who borrowed her cousin's phoenix pin to impress a potential suitor. It worked briefly, until her deception was uncovered, and she was reassigned to manage royal chicken feed inventory. For life. The chickens, one imagines, were indifferent. You shift a little, as the court lady continues examining your hypothetical royal scalp. She lifts something from the tray, a narrow tapered hair stick, carved from dark wood. She holds it against your head, then tisks gently. "Too wide for someone of your station," she murmurs. Ouch. Back to the commoner pile for you. But here's where it gets even more layered, because ornaments weren't always visible. Some nobles had hidden signifiers tucked beneath the outer coils of hair. A carved stone bead with the emblem of your ancestral house. A dyed silk thread in the exact shade of your astrological element. One nobleman famously wore a sliver of petrified lotus root inside his bun as a tribute to his late grandmother. It smelled terrible, but who were you to argue with grief? Function also met fashion. The structure of these hair arrangements often meant that hair had to be coiled in specific ways to balance the weight of the accessories. That meant the architecture of your hairstyle was almost mathematical. Angles, tension points, and something palace stylists referred to ominously as the spiral fulcrum. Get it wrong, and your entire topknot could collapse mid-bow, which happened to one poor ambassador during a meeting with the emperor. The silence was legendary. Then, there were the rules about how many accessories you could wear. Too few, and you looked underdressed. Too many, and you were labeled a head peacock, a snide term used in palace gossip circles. One eunuch's diary from the Lei dynasty includes the delightful line, "Lady Huang appeared today, as if she'd robbed a lacquerware stall." Subtle shade, absolutely. And the court ate it up. There was also one small drawer in the accessory box no one liked to talk about. The drawer, marked disciplinary. These were ornaments you had to wear when you were in trouble. Ever heard of the hairpin of humility? A large, unadorned wooden pin shaped like a broom handle. If you wore it in court, it meant you'd either misspoke and spilled something on the emperor's slippers, or accidentally referred to your aunt as resembling a dumpling. It stayed in for a full day, and people would absolutely pretend not to see it, while staring at it relentlessly. You might think this level of detail is absurd, and you'd be right. But in a society where facial expressions were controlled, clothing colors were regulated, and speech was filtered through 17 layers of etiquette hair, became one of the last frontiers of self-expression, however tightly choreographed that expression was. As the stylist finally finishes your inspection, she offers a soft smile. Then she leans in, and with great care, tucks a single lacquered pin just behind your ear. It's shaped like a water buffalo horn and smells faintly of sesame oil. Apparently, you've been approved for court service entry level, of course. But don't get too excited. That pin might also mean you're scheduled to sweep the pavilion after this week's poetry recital. Still, you'll look the part doing it. You're standing now beneath a long eave, where the scent of burning agar wood drifts lazily through the humid air. You're early, too early, for the next royal procession, but no one told you that the grooming process begins hours before anything remotely ceremonial happens. And so you find yourself ushered into a back chamber of the palace by 2 attendants in embroidered silk who exchange a knowing glance. One word, oiling. You sit down on a low-polished stool that creaks in protest beneath the unexpected presence of your probably not royal backside. The walls are lined with old jars, some ceramic, some bamboo with handwritten labels that translate into things like basil essence, charred citrus, and water from a dragon-washed lotus. You decide not to ask what that last one means. Too early, too oily. The royal hair oiling ritual is less a beauty routine and more a sacred endurance test. Before anything else happens, before the coiling, the pinning, the ornamental declarations of rank, your scalp must be massaged, lubricated, and spiritually aligned. This can take up to 2 hours if your head is deemed particularly out of balance, which you've just been informed yours is. Congratulations. Historians still argue whether the oil blends were actually effective or just expensive concoctions meant to keep the palace economy busy. The base was usually sesame or coconut, infused with various herbs like shiso patchouli and crushed betel leaf. Some versions included a dash of fermented pomelo rind, which sounds more like a salad dressing than a scalp tonic. Yet here it is warm, fragrant, and now trickling down the back of your neck like a sleepy snail. Your attendant begins the massage. Her thumbs press behind your ears, then circle your temples in slow, deliberate loops. You'd feel relaxed if not for the constant low murmur of court gossip filtering in from the outer salon. Turns out, the hair-oiling chamber is the palace's unofficial news network. Oh, did you hear about Lady Vaughn? One servant whispers. She had to cut her side braids short, said it was a new aesthetic, but everyone knows it was lice. No gasps, another. I heard it was spiritual penance. Her astrologer warned her about Mars rising over her hairline. You stifle a laugh. Apparently, the royal court isn't so different from a modern office break room if the break room had incense ceiling fans made of woven reeds and a strict protocol about which way to tilt your head while getting oiled. Just then, the gossip hits high gear. The eunuchs say the crown prince tripped on his own hair sash yesterday during sparring practice, someone says. He fell straight into the koi pond. Again, your stylist snorts softly, but recovers quickly. She has the focus of a monk. One hand supports your head, while the other pours another spoonful of warmed oil onto your scalp. The sensation is strangely hypnotic, like being slowly dipped into a rice cooker, set to nap. You're told this oiling ritual serves multiple purposes. It encourages hair growth, yes, but also protects against spirits, said to nibble on unguarded roots during the ghost month. Apparently, spirits love flyaway hairs. Who knew? Another function. Diplomacy. Yes, diplomatic oiling. When visiting dignitaries were hosted in the palace, their head attendants would sometimes be offered sample oils as gifts. There's a legend about a prince from Champa who took offense at being offered the wrong base oil, a sesame blend, when coconut was more appropriate for his climate. The resulting tension nearly led to a trade standoff. Oil slicks, indeed. And here's a fun tidbit during the Lei dynasty. High-ranking courtiers were expected to compose a poem of gratitude after their oiling session. Just a few lines, but ideally something touching and mildly self-deprecating. One such verse still survives on an old fan, oiled once more like river reeds. My thoughts too slick to hold. The day slides off my shoulders and into the emperor's comb. Catchy, right? The oiling ends as silently as it began. Your hair now glistens like a lacquered cabinet, smelling faintly of herbs, and the kind of ancient wisdom usually reserved for forest monks and mildly eccentric librarians. Your attendant wraps your head in silk to help the oils settle into the follicles, and you're told not to move for 15 minutes. Perfect time to eavesdrop again, you know. Says one voice, Madame Quyen, switched to lotus oil, and now her dreams are all prophetic. Oh, I tried that, says another. Just gave me indigestion. You hear a soft splash in the courtyard outside, perhaps another noble tripping into a koi pond, and let your eyes drift shut. Despite the chatter, despite the faint tickle of oil on your temple, you feel deeply, almost absurdly calm. Something about this world of ritualized vanity has lulled you into a peculiar kind of peace. And it's not even noon yet. Eventually, you're unwrapped, patted gently with cloth, soaked in rosewater, and deemed ready for the styling phase. But before you're whisked away, your attendant presents a small square of parchment with a delicate brush painting on it, a single droplet of oil, cradled by a lotus petal. It's your scalp balance sigil, she whispers. You nod because sure, that sounds important. You're escorted now gliding really through a narrow passage, lined with moonlight-colored tiles. The scent of your freshly oiled scalp mingles with the faint aroma of lemongrass, wafting from a courtyard kitchen somewhere far off. You're not alone. A slow procession of similarly dewy-headed nobles trails ahead of you, each wrapped in gauzy silk and silence. And then you arrive the styling chamber, or, as it's known among insiders, the Hall of Many Knots. This room is less like a salon and more like a stage set. Rows of lacquered mirrors, not for vanity, but for symmetry checks, gleam in the soft light of oil lamps. Dozens of carved stools are arranged in a neat semicircle, each occupied by a stylist of elite standing members of a guild so respected they're allowed to wear combs with gold inlays. You're assigned to a stylist named Ti Jiao, whose calm gaze suggests she's seen more tangled messes, both literal and political, than any general ever has. You're here to receive the Jiao Tu Huang, or Four Winds Knot. It's not the most ornate style in the royal catalogue, but it's among the most symbolic. Each coil represents a cardinal direction, and together they're said to balance your intentions with the universe. Romantic, right? Well, until you realize how hard it is to sit still for the 4 hours it takes to complete. The jiao starts by dividing your hair into 4 thick sections and murmuring a quiet incantation. Not magical, more like a meditation mantra. Wind from the east brings the breath of ancestors. Wind from the south stirs the rice. Wind from the west cools the spirit. Wind from the north whispers caution. You repeat it under your breath, because why not? It's probably good luck. Or at least more useful than most New Year's resolutions. Now the real work begins. Section by section, she coils your hair into smooth loops, using hand-dyed silk cords to hold the shape. It's like watching someone embroider with living thread. Each knot must be perfectly symmetrical, resting at a 45-degree angle from the crown. One wrong move, and it starts again. And believe me, you do wrong moves. Lots of them. Fortunately, Ti Jiao is patient. As the first wind knot takes shape, she tells you of a legendary royal hairstylist who once coiled an entire knot system to resemble a crane in flight. It was so intricate that the poor noblewoman had to sleep upright for 3 days. Historians still argue whether the design was practical or just punishment for flirting with the emperor's poetry tutor. But that's not even the strangest tale. There's a whispered story about a failed knot style called the bamboo cyclone. It was supposed to resemble a swirling breeze caught in mid-motion. Unfortunately, it also looked like a hornet's nest, and the lady who wore it got laughed out of the seasonal lantern procession. Some say she moved to the mountains and became a beekeeper out of spite. Back in the present, your second knot is coming together. This one sits slightly higher to guide your thoughts upward. Di Jiao says, a fellow stylist next to you is sculpting something on another client that looks vaguely like a sailboat. Experimental, she explains when caught staring. You nod solemnly, as though it all makes perfect sense. Around you, the chamber has taken on a hush. Even the gossipy attendants are too mesmerized by the coiling to whisper. You start to feel it, too, an odd tranquility. There's something strangely comforting about being woven into place. Your scalp tingles gently from the tension of the silk cords. Your neck, however, is beginning to protest. The third knot is the trickiest. It rests at the base of the skull, and gravity is its sworn enemy. A tiny silver hook is used to secure the silk under a hidden loop of hair. Don't move. Ti Jiao warns softly, and you freeze as though balancing eggs on your ears. She leans in breath warm against your temple. This knot holds your yesterday, she says. It's the only one we never untie too quickly. Well, that's a bit ominous, but also weirdly poetic. You make a mental note to say that next time someone asks why you're still overthinking a conversation from 2014. Finally, the fourth and final wind. This one pulls the remaining length of your hair upward, looping it over the crown in a crescent shape. It's meant to be light airy, like the whisper of bamboo, she says. You're not sure if it's the metaphor or the tension headache kicking in, but you feel vaguely airborne. Historians speculate the Gyeo Tu Puang was inspired by a combination of indigenous animist beliefs and early Chinese cosmology. What's undeniable is its importance. Nobles wore it during solstice festivals, royal family debates, and rituals involving ancestor veneration. It was meant to signal unity with nature, the land, and when done properly, the monarchy itself. It was also a nightmare to maintain. Court records from the Strand dynasty describe assistants who did nothing but follow their mistresses around with emergency hairstyling kits. These included miniature combs, extra silk cords, and pins dipped in beeswax to hold flyaways. One lady famously had a backup stylist who traveled with her between palaces. Her name was Lady Yen, and she reportedly fired an entire salon once because they braided counterclockwise. "My aura collapsed," she later claimed, "and now it's your turn to stand." The Jiao finishes with a final flourish. She tucks a pale blue bead into the central knot. "To bring clarity," she whispers. Then she steps back and bows. Your hair is now a compass, a prayer, and probably a decent perch for small birds. You bow in return, albeit carefully. No sudden movements, no wind. Ironically, you are ready. You step out of the styling chamber now, an unwilling ambassador of equilibrium, your head carrying a structure so elaborate it could be mistaken for a small pagoda. As you pass through the palace corridors, your hair's gravitational pull seems to grow with each step. The stone tiles beneath your feet are slick with condensation. Your reflection shimmers faintly in puddles that haven't dried since last night's storm. Welcome to the daily torment that is monsoon season. In a palace without umbrellas, large enough for egos and hair alike. It begins subtly. A gentle roll of thunder in the distance, a shift in the wind, bringing with it the earthy scent of wet soil, lotus roots and mildew that hides behind even the most elegant tapestries. You glance up at the sky, just as a servant scrambles by, holding a folded silk tarp and muttering something that definitely isn't part of the Confucian classics. You pick up your pace, the knots on your head beginning to sag ever so slightly as the humidity wraps around your scalp like a wool blanket left out in the rain. You pass a group of court ladies who are frantically patting their heads with handkerchiefs. One of them has already surrendered. The coils at the back of her head have wilted into sad, noodle-like loops. She covers her shame with a decorative fan eyes wide with dread. Inside the palace, entire hallways are designated for emergency hair triage during monsoon bursts. One nicknamed the Chamber of Frizz is kept stocked with small braziers of charcoal and cloths soaked in rice vinegar to draw out moisture. There are also whisperings of a secret recipe involving crushed mung beans and eel fat to hold shape in high humidity. You pretend not to notice a nearby eunuch furiously rubbing something suspiciously green into the roots of a panicked mandarin's topknot. You duck into a covered corridor just as the skies break open. Tropical rain slams against the clay roof tiles with the rhythm of an angry drum circle. The scent of wet hair, steaming oil, and old lacquer fills the air. Somewhere someone slips and curses softly, followed by an even softer shh. The emperor's cousin is meditating. The palace hairstylists, those calm gods of balance, are now in full crisis mode. They patrol the halls with their kits, tied to their waists like ancient surgeons. Their weapons, mini-combs, vials of hair resin rice, paper blotters, and panic in their eyes. You spot one crouching behind a folding screen, hastily reinforcing the northern loop of a swan in moonlight style before the empress's banquet. Your own hair is holding barely, but your temples are starting to tingle ominously, the way foundation starts to betray you after too many hours under fluorescent lights. A stylist spots you from across the hall and squints. "You're leaning west," she mutters, before tugging your crescent coil back into alignment with alarming efficiency. You nod in silent gratitude, cheeks flushed with embarrassment or heat. You're not sure anymore. Of course, all this trouble isn't just vanity. There are spiritual implications, too. Wet, unbalanced hair is said to disrupt chi flow and invite illness or misfortune. Some court astrologers claimed that a lopsided bun during a thunderstorm could attract bad air or worse, make your next poetry recital completely uninspired. And we can't have that now, can we? Historians still debate whether such beliefs were taken seriously or merely encouraged by palace stylists who needed job security. But one thing's certain. No one, absolutely no one, dared attend a court function with visible frizz. You overhear a courtier groan as she repositions her entire bun structure with the help of 3 assistants and a lacquered rod. "This is the last time I wear the 4 winds during rain month," she mutters. "Next time, I'm going full cicada shell." Let it drip. Ah yes, the cicada shell. A style worn close to the scalp, with 2 rigid coils tucked like shells behind the ears. Popular among monks and those too tired to pretend anymore. Surprisingly chic. You make a mental note, and it's not just the women. The men's styles suffer too. Royal bureaucrats who sport slightly less dramatic, but equally symbolic styles often end up with damp tufts sprouting from under their caps, like wilted bonsai trees. One young scribe has resorted to tying his side knots with ribbon used for wrapping ceremonial rice cakes. Desperate times. To make matters worse, there's a superstition that mirror reflections during storms can reverse intention, a confusing but deeply unsettling notion. This leads to an entire wing of the palace having its mirrors turned to the wall every time the rain starts. You walk past one such corridor and nearly collide with a stylist carrying an entire mirror in a cloth sack. "It's for everyone's safety," she mutters, as if transporting a cursed relic. You finally reach the royal antechamber, where wet nobles gather like ruffled cranes. They sit politely upright, pretending not to notice the steady drip-drip from their headpieces. An assistant dabs at the floor with a cloth shaped like a lotus leaf. Outside, the rain continues in its slow, hypnotic rhythm, and yet somehow, in this absurd dance between climate and coiffure, there is beauty, a quiet determination, the elegance of a society that refuses to let even a subtropical deluge compromise its symmetrical dignity. You adjust your shoulders, breathe in the scent of jasmine and damp silk, and close your eyes. Your scalp itches. Your temples ache, but your knots remain in place, swaying only slightly with each breath. For now, you are undefeated. By now, you've grown oddly proud of your hair's resilience. It's made it through a tropical downpour, 3 emergency realignments, and at least 1 near miss involving a stray pigeon. You are more architecture than person, a carefully lacquered monument to symmetry and seasonal discomfort. But today, you're being summoned not for a procession or poetry banquet. No, you're going somewhere even more peculiar. A chamber tucked behind the eastern wall of the palace, just past a koi pond that smells faintly of sweet algae and forgotten sandals. Inside, scholars and stylists gather not with combs and oils, but with scrolls, charts, and tiny calipers. Welcome to the world of cranial feng shui. Here, hairstyles are no longer just declarations of status or defiance of weather. They are thought to shape energy itself, the alignment of bones, thoughts, and spirits, funneled through the curvature of your hair. And you, dear guest, are about to be assessed. You sit before a panel of 3 figures, an astrologer, a hair priestess, and what might be the palace's only metaphysical barber. They bow in unison. You bow back. Your head tilts a bit to the left during the bow, and immediately the barber scribbles something down. South-leaning, he murmurs, "Interesting." They begin by measuring your skull. No, not like a phrenologist with actual reverence. A small bronze compass is placed atop your head, aligned with magnetic north. Then out come scrolls that look like maps of distant provinces, except they represent the scalp. The Crown River flows strongest here, one of the mutters poking the area near your hair whirl. But there's turbulence near the thought hills. Apparently, your hairline is auspiciously arched, which bodes well for matters of diplomacy, though one priestess warns you of a minor blockage near the destiny spiral. You nod solemnly, pretending this isn't your first destiny spiral intervention. Historians still debate whether cranial feng shui was ever practiced on a wide scale, or simply existed within small elite circles of the court. But there's no denying the amount of attention paid to how the shape and flow of hair influenced one's fate. Scrolls from the early Li dynasty describe hairstyles designed specifically to direct inner waters away from the temples, thereby reducing clouded judgment. It's essentially the ancient Vietnamese version of "don't let it go to your head." Now comes the fun part. Based on their reading of your head energy, the experts recommend a new style, the silken boat, a crescent-shaped updo that channels both clarity and humility. 2 traits you've definitely been faking for the last few hours. It involves parting your hair precisely from the apex of your skull down to the gateway ridge, a ridge you didn't know you had. The barber explains that the part must follow your dominant energy channel, which runs slightly to the left for you. Hair parted against its energy flow, he warns, invites miscommunication, financial confusion, and damp socks. You blink. Well, that explains a lot. The stylists take over, and the transformation begins. As your hair is repositioned, you're encouraged to visualize wind passing over rice fields, to imagine a canal clearing itself after a monsoon. You try. You really do. But instead, your mind drifts to the faint sound of someone sneezing in the hallway, and a fly repeatedly crashing into a nearby lantern. Your hair is eventually shaped into the predicted style, 2 symmetrical loops, curving backward like the sails of a fishing boat at dawn. A single obsidian bead is tucked into the center of the coil, said to absorb negative energy and reflect only the truest intentions. It also keeps the crown stable on humid days, someone adds helpfully. Of course not everyone trusted cranial feng shui. A famous Lei dynasty official named Quan Tri famously refused to have his hair red. He wore a jagged part down the center of his scalp and claimed that chaos bred creativity. He also lost 3 military campaigns and accidentally insulted a Buddhist monk during a diplomatic visit, so your mileage may vary. Still, many courtiers swore by their head alignments. One woman reportedly changed her entire hairstyle after a dream in which her braid strangled a snake. She then fasted for 9 days and emerged with a new coil pattern that she said brought her serenity and an improved relationship with her mother-in-law. Unverified but inspiring. You glance at your reflection in a polished brass plate. Your new style feels oddly comfortable, like you've realigned with some ancient version of yourself who once knew how to breathe from their belly and cook lotus root properly. You tilt your head, Left, then right, and the stylist sighs. Perfect balance, she says. You've cleared the spiral. You feel like someone should hand you a medal, or at least a chilled tea. Instead, they hand you a brush with your name burned into the handle and wish you a harmonious journey. You rise slowly, your posture instinctively straighter, as though your hair has become a small antenna, drawing in universal wisdom, or just trying to avoid hitting the low lintel above the door. As you walk back into the palace hallway, you feel different, calmer. Maybe it's the balance, maybe it's the head massage, or maybe, just maybe, it's because your scalp is no longer at war with itself, and that's something. The palace is humming with anticipation today. You can feel it in the air, subtle, like a change in barometric pressure. Servants are moving with purpose. Courtiers are whispering a little more urgently. Something is off. You're barely halfway through your morning lotus tea when an attendant hurries over and tugs at your sleeve. To the inner archives, she hisses. Quickly, something's been found. So naturally, you follow. Past the main hall, down a narrow staircase that smells faintly of mold and bamboo charcoal, into a low-ceilinged room, lined with scrolls, tax ledgers, and what may or may not be a sleeping cat, disguised as a pillow. And there it is laid out reverently on a lacquered reading table, an old comb, ivory faintly yellowed with hair still tangled in its teeth. Everyone is gathered around it, like it's the sword of a fallen general. One scribe is already sketching it. Another is sniffing it. Forensic work old school. This, you're told, is no ordinary comb. It's the missing relic from the great comb theft of 1462, an incident so minor and yet so steeped in palace intrigue that it lives on in cautionary scrolls and bedtime stories alike. Back in the mid-15th century, during the reign of Emperor Lê Tông, a beautifully carved ivory comb went missing from the royal dressing chambers. But this wasn't just a grooming tool. It was said to have belonged to his grandmother, the Dowager Empress Ngoc Lan, a formidable woman who wore her hair in a style nicknamed Heaven's Spine, 4 vertical braids, bound so tightly that she once bent an iron hairpin trying to secure them. The comb had been passed down as a ceremonial object used during certain ancestral rites. It was stored in a lacquer box, inlaid with pearls, and watched over by a team of eunuchs whose sole job was to keep the comb from harm and humidity. They failed spectacularly. One morning it was simply gone. Historians still argue whether the comb was actually stolen or simply misplaced in a cloud of camellia-scented confusion. But according to court records, suspicion immediately fell on Lady Duong, a lower noblewoman known for her impeccable hair and slightly too loud laughter. She had been seen admiring the comb a few days earlier, and had rather foolishly joked that she'd sell her best sandalwood bracelet for a comb like that. She was dragged in for questioning. Her quarters searched, her maids interrogated. No comb, no leads, just a whole lot of gossip, and a sudden spike in anonymous poetry about betrayal and hairpins. Then in a twist, worthy of a stage play, the emperor himself got involved. He commissioned a search party. He suspended the head of the palace grooming staff. One poor eunuch, allegedly blamed for the whole debacle, was reassigned to rice silo inventory, a grim fate indeed. And the worst part: without the comb, certain ceremonial hairstyles couldn't be performed. It had a specific tooth width that created the ancestral wave pattern used during lunar offerings and royal funerals. Attempts to replicate the pattern failed miserably. The Empress's topknot ended up looking like a startled goose. There are records of desperate improvisations. A comb carved from bamboo, another from horn. But none had the spiritual weight of the original. One ceremony was even delayed due to hair irregularity. Imagine explaining that to the ancestors. Then just as mysteriously as it vanished, the comb reappeared. 3 years later, buried beneath a wooden floorboard in the West Wing. Covered in silk, wrapped like a forgotten talisman. No one confessed. No one was punished. The official story was spiritual misplacement, a very convenient term that might also translate to someone got scared and put it back. The scandal left a mark. For decades afterward, any sudden disappearance at court, be it a teacup, a sandal, or someone's dignity, was jokingly referred to as a second comb affair. Stylists became paranoid. They attached silk cords to their combs, wore them around their necks like amulets. Some even had protective blessings, inked onto the handles in microscopic script. Now, centuries later, you're here watching the recovered relic being catalogued, the old crime scene poked at by fresh hands. And wouldn't you know it, the comb still smells faintly of jasmine and guilt. A scholar lets you hold it briefly. It's lighter than you expect. The teeth are so fine, they could split a single strand into 2. You run your fingers along its edge, wondering what other secrets it's brushed through. Court confessions whispered between plaits, hidden romances coded in braids. That time, someone's topknot caught fire near the lanterns, and no one mentioned it again. And then, just like that, the moment passes. The comb is sealed back into a velvet-lined box and taken away to be blessed restored, and presumably watched over much more carefully this time. As you return to the main hall, the storm outside is cleared, and sunlight glances off the wet tiles. A servant is drying a hairpiece over a hibiscus brazier. Somewhere nearby, you hear a lady-in-waiting murmur, "It's just a comb," and someone else reply, "Nothing is ever just a comb in this palace." You smile, and you tighten your own hair ornament just in case. The palace has quieted now. Late afternoon sun slants through latticed windows, tracing warm, golden lines across the tile. You're walking slowly, almost lazily, past the ancestral altar chamber, when you hear a low bell ring, soft and solemn. A figure dressed in mourning white steps out and bows. Without speaking, she gestures for you to follow. You're being led to one of the palace's most secretive ceremonies, something few outsiders ever witnessed. A ghost marriage. And not just any ghost marriage, but one involving a royal. And as is custom, you're not here to observe the vows or offer incense. You're here for the hair. The air thickens as you enter the preparation room. Incense curls like fog around low tables, stacked with ceremonial cloths. The floor is cool underfoot, covered in woven mats dusted with crushed lotus petals. In the center of the room lies the body of a young noblewoman. Her face serene, her skin powdered, her limbs posed with reverence. She was engaged to a prince, they say, but died of illness before the union could take place. So the marriage proceeds in spirit. The groom is not present. He's fasting in solitude, but everything else unfolds just as it would for the living. And that begins with hair. In ancient Vietnamese tradition, especially among royal families, the hair of the bride-to-be was considered the physical thread connecting her spirit to the world. That meant, even in death, it had to be treated with precision, symbolism, and care. You kneel beside the attendants, watching as they begin their work. A basin of water infused with grapefruit leaf is used first to cleanse lingering sorrow. The hair is rinsed, sectioned and combed with a carved horn comb, dipped in vinegar and mint. Each stroke is slow rhythmic, as though pulling tension from the air itself. One of the attendants murmurs a prayer with every pass of the comb. Smooth the path, clear the road. May no knots follow where she goes. You feel your breathing slow to match the comb's cadence. It's mesmerizing, peaceful even. In this moment, grief doesn't sting. It drapes itself across the room like a soft shawl, gentle and full of memory. The hairstyle they're forming is called topknot, the hair of the bond. A long braid beginning at the crown and descending down the back, interwoven with red silk and tiny white orchids. It's said to symbolize the bridge between two souls, spanning life and death. Historians still argue whether the ghost marriage custom originated in Jai Viet itself, or came from earlier Chinese or Cham influences. What's certain is that by the 14th century, it had become a deeply rooted ritual among elite families, especially when lineage preservation and spiritual closure were at stake. And it wasn't just about the bride. On another mat, in a chamber across the courtyard, a second braid is being prepared from the groom's hair, or, in this case, a symbolic lock from his pillow. The two braids will later be tied together with a knot of crimson thread, placed in a sandalwood box, and buried at the foot of an ancestral tree. It's a union, quiet, solemn, and invisible. As you watch the braid form, you notice the attendants weaving something else into the strands, a tiny scroll. It's almost too small to see, but you catch a glimpse of a few words. May we meet where jasmine blooms and drums are silent. This you learn is a tradition known as Loi Gui, the scent word, a private message from family or betrothed, tucked into the braid to guide the soul on its journey. Most were poems. Some were confessions. A few were even jokes if the deceased had a sense of humor and a forgiving family. One scroll found in an ancient tomb read, "Tell Aunt Ha, she still owes me 2 silvers. In this case, the scroll was written by the groom himself, who, according to palace rumors, once sang a poem so badly at a banquet that this young woman threatened to end the engagement, only to laugh and offer him a plum afterward. You step back now, giving the attendants space. One of them offers you a small cup of mulberry tea, a traditional drink for mourners, meant to soothe the throat from unspoken words. You sip. It's sour, earthy, and grounding. The final steps are nearly complete. The braid has been finished with a carved jade bead, representing rebirth, and a single white feather, possibly from a heron tucked just behind the ear. This, the stylist tells you, will guide her spirit gently across the threshold. Suddenly, the room falls completely still. A light breeze stirs the incense smoke. Somewhere outside, a string instrument begins to play a slow, meandering tune. One of the elder priestesses steps forward and lifts the bride's braid, now full and gleaming, into her hands. She places it carefully across the body's shoulder and whispers, "Walk, slow little river." You don't know whether she means the soul or the hair. Maybe both. The ghost wedding will take place at dusk. The braid will be carried in a procession lit by paper lanterns, shaped like lotuses. You're told not to attend. It's for family only. But you're offered a single orchid petal from the ceremony as a token. You tuck it behind your ear, where it rests unnoticed and weightless. As you step out of the room, you realize how much power these people believe resides in something as seemingly mundane as hair. Love, mourning memory, even hope all braided, combed, and wrapped into strands that will never speak, but somehow always say enough. You're walking again further from the palace center now, into the parts of the grounds where the stones are less polished, and the grass grows between the cracks. The air smells different here, warmer, wilder. You pass a row of low buildings, where the sounds of daily labor hum softly rice, being pounded silk, being dyed gossip, being passed like a gentle breeze between open doorways. Here the hairstyles are simpler. Tighter braids, practical knots, no ivory combs, no phoenix pins. And yet there's something quietly powerful about them. You're in the peasant quarters now, where hair is less about elegance and more about survival communication and even espionage. It all starts with a woman squatting on a stool in front of her daughter, weaving a 3-strand braid so quickly and smoothly you'd think she was born with calloused fingers. But if you look closely, the braid isn't just decorative. It has a knot near the top, a subtle loop tucked just beneath the crown. To an outsider, it looks like a careless bump. But to those in the know, it's a message the harvest is short this season. Expect shortages in ancient Jai Viet, especially during the later Tran and early Ho dynasties, when border tensions and regional instability made travel dangerous, and messages difficult to send hair became a hidden language. Villagers and lower courtiers developed a covert code of braids and knots, what scholars now call topknot, or signal hair. One loop meant danger on the road, 2 safe passage ahead. A wrapped strand could indicate a need for supplies, and in more complex systems, entire narratives could be conveyed using length tightness and parting. Some messages took hours to weave. Some were hidden inside children's hair, as they were the least likely to be searched. Historians still argue whether these practices were widespread or mostly confined to resistance groups and border provinces. But written records hint at how effective they were. One captured courier confessed under duress that his topknot had carried a coded warning about an ambush woven by a woman whose job was officially rice wine fermenter. Spoiler: she wasn't just fermenting wine. You follow the path through a cluster of homes, each with bundles of drying herbs hanging in the windows. A young woman with ink-stained fingers sits on her porch, adjusting the hair of her younger brother. His braid has a small copper bead hidden near the base. You glance away before you look like you're staring. That bead might say more than you're meant to hear. It's not just the countryside. Even within the palace, these secret hair messages found their way in, especially during times of political unrest. A famous example is Lady Trinh Puong, a palace servant, known for her absolute silence and impeccable side braids. She was later revealed to have been a spy for the southern court, passing messages to her handlers through subtle shifts in her hair parting. Every 3 days, she'd alter the tilt left-right center. Each change correlated to troop movements outside the capital. No one suspected a thing until someone found her comb. A crude object made from bamboo and bone, it had marks carved along its spine that, when read with a mirror and a lot of imagination, revealed a basic cipher key. Naturally, she disappeared the next day. Some say she fled. Others believe she was reassigned to the kitchen and made a legendary fish soup. As with most palace scandals, no one ever really knows. And it wasn't just women. Men used coded hair to especially lower-ranking scribes, eunuchs, and soldiers. The twist and tug method involved subtly altering the tightness of the base knot. Too loose. The gate guards had been bribed. Too tight. There would be a checkpoint. Hair became the battlefield's softest, most intimate weapon. There's a faded scroll in the National Archives with a curious poem that many believe is a coded reference to this practice. If you see the braid that bends like wind, follow not. The tide is wrong. But if the part runs firm and thin, the harvest road is safe and long. Of course, once this system was discovered, authorities cracked down hard. Stylists were watched. Peasant women questioned. Some were forced to unbraid their hair in public, an act of humiliation and control. But like most good secrets, the practice simply went underground. You sit now on the low step of a clay hut, sipping cooled rice water, handed to you by a kind old man who smells faintly of peppermint and patience. He gestures to a nearby child whose hair has been carefully parted and looped into an odd but elegant S shape. "She's our message girl," he says with a wink. Carries the news faster than birds. You nod, impressed. You're tempted to ask what the message is, but decide to let it remain a mystery. After all, in a world where scrolls can be burned and messengers can be caught, a single strand of hair can still whisper the truth to someone who knows how to listen. As you rise to leave, the old man offers you a bit of string. For your hair, he says, though you're not sure if he means for tying it back or saying something you haven't yet found the words for. Either way, you tuck it into your sleeve, just in case. Your feet carry you now along the winding corridor known as the Hall of Petitions, a long stretch of lacquered wood, where royal decrees once echoed like thunder, and minor nobles fidgeted in fear of being noticed. It's strangely quiet now. The only sound is the faint tapping of your sandals, and the occasional sigh of the breeze slipping through bamboo shutters. You didn't expect to be summoned here, but a scroll arrived this morning with red ribbon and black ink, calling you to the Archive of Appearance Laws, a place most courtiers avoid, like bad seafood, and you're about to find out why. The archivist, a thin man who smells vaguely of ink and roasted peanuts, waves you toward a long table covered in dusty scrolls. You've heard of royal clothing edicts, he says dryly. But did you know about the hair laws? You blink. This is new. He unfurls a scroll with deliberate ceremony. The calligraphy is graceful, but firm, full of flourishes and razor-sharp dots. Edict 178, Year of the Copper Rooster, he reads aloud. All noblemen must part their hair toward justice. You squint. Toward justice. He nods straight-faced, specifically to the left, symbolic of the emperor's benevolence, which naturally flows eastward. A part to the right was viewed as defiance confusion of celestial alignment, or worse, fashionable individualism. You try very hard not to laugh. This, as it turns out, was one of many oddly specific hair-related laws implemented across different Vietnamese dynasties. The Lý dynasty was fond of regulating length earlobe for junior scribes, shoulder for married courtiers. The Tran dynasty added texture restrictions, banning artificially frizzed hair among palace musicians after a brief but scandalous trend. Then came the Ho dynasty, with what scholars refer to affectionately as the Cowlick Edict. Issued in a moment of administrative overreach, it declared that all male officials with visible cowlicks had to either smooth them with rice paste daily or wear a cap with no less than 3 ornamental ridges to disguise their unruly follicles. Historians still argue whether this was due to superstition, cowlicks being considered a mark of impulsiveness, or simply a personal pet peeve of Emperor Ho Quy Ly, who was reportedly very bald and very bitter. The archive houses illustrations of approved styles, including helpful diagrams. The river bend part. A wavy sideline worn only during mourning. The heaven gate line straight down the middle, but only if you pass the civil service exam with distinction. And the infamous moonbreaker, a diagonally slashed part that was briefly popular among rebellious poets, until the emperor banned it for being distracting. You run your hand along the inked parchment, marveling at how much meaning was once loaded into the direction of a comb. These laws weren't just aesthetic, they were tools of control. After all, what better way to enforce conformity than by regulating what grows directly out of your subjects' heads? One scroll details a palace investigation into a nobleman who had quietly flipped his part during a full moon banquet. The implications were serious. Was he signaling disloyalty, attempting to realign with northern rebel factions, or had he simply gotten confused after bathing? The truth never emerged, but he was demoted to royal librarian, a not-so-subtle message. And just like that, the left part doctrine remained unchallenged. Later during the Lei dynasty, these restrictions softened. The palace grew more tolerant of expressive arrangement, provided it didn't overshadow official hats or imply the influence of foreign customs. A brief trend known as the clouded foxtail swept through court, a soft, fluttery arrangement with a part that curved slightly left, then veered dramatically back to center. It was tolerated, then banned, then cautiously reinstated on festival days, and yet beneath all these rules, people still found ways to rebel quietly. Stylists developed invisible techniques, parting the outermost layer to the left, while the underlayers swirled elsewhere. It became a game of subtext. One particularly bold courtier reportedly wore 6 hidden parts on the same scalp, each carefully disguised under pinned loops. He never got caught. He also never rose beyond third-tier bureaucrat. You ask the archivist how all this enforcement was even possible. He grins and produces a strange object, a parting ruler. A lacquered strip with adjustable teeth used by inspectors to ensure compliance with daily grooming codes. It looks vaguely like something sold today on late-night infomercials. As you handle the ruler, he says, "There's a story probably apocryphal about an official who wore a wig with a pre-approved part to court. When it slipped during a thunderstorm, revealing his natural center part, he claimed divine will had changed his alignment." The emperor wasn't amused. You chuckle, but it's a little sobering. Even something as benign as how your hair divided could be evidence of loyalty or rebellion. On your way out, the archivist offers you a thin booklet, a reprint of all known royal hair edicts, annotated with sarcastic commentary from later scholars. It's titled "Toward Justice and Other Directions." You flip it open, scanning the first line. "Let no strand mislead the empire." You nod, tucking it into your sleeve, and resolve just for tonight to part your hair ever so slightly left of center, just enough to stay out of trouble, but not enough to be boring, because even in a palace of rules and rituals sometimes, the hair leads where the heart dares not. Evening falls like lacquer spilled across silk, smooth, dark, and gleaming in places. The palace grows quieter, the buzz of daytime rituals fading into the gentle rhythms of night sandals, padding on stone hushed laughter, behind screens, and the soft brushing of hair echoing like whispers through open-air corridors. You're following a lantern-bearer now, her flame flickering like a firefly in a jar, as she leads you out through the eastern gate of the inner court. Past a grove of areca palms, past a koi pond reflecting broken stars. then down a narrow slope you didn't know existed. At the bottom, half hidden by mossy stones and wild orchid vines, you find it a shrine, small, unmarked, and very, very old. This, the lantern-bearer says softly, is the Temple of Burnt Ends. You blink. That can't be what she means. She gestures toward the altar, where a shallow bowl of ash sits beside a pair of ancient scissors, and what appears to be a braided offering box made of hair. The scent in the air is unmistakable, burnt keratin old incense, and somehow lavender. Yes, this is real. In the depths of palace lore, there are references to a site where royalty once offered hair, to the ancestors not in dramatic locks, but in clippings, the frayed ends, the broken strands, the carefully snipped symbols of regret, resolve, or rebirth. It's said that in the Li dynasty, women of the court who suffered personal failure, a lost promotion, a public embarrassment, a romantic betrayal, would quietly come here at dusk. They'd trim a few ends of their hair, whisper a confession into the wind, and burn the fragments as a vow to begin anew. Historians still argue whether this temple was formally recognized or existed as an unofficial safe space within the rigid confines of court etiquette. One scroll mentions a house of embered locks, while another vaguely refers to the place where the silent weep through flame. You kneel at the edge of the stone threshold, feeling the warm breath of the offering fire, still glowing faintly in its bowl. Someone has been here recently. A small pile of charred strands still smolders, some red, some black, some streaked with gray. A story in everyone. The lantern-bearer hands you a folded parchment. These were left by Lady Min Thao, she says. She came often, a wise woman, very tangled. You open the note. The handwriting is small, looping 3 ends for 3 regrets. 1, I loved where I should have waited. 2, I spoke when I should have listened. 3, I forgot that still water cuts the stone. You exhale slowly, folding the parchment back with reverence. Around the shrine, the walls are lined with carvings, simple abstract, possibly coded. One resembles a spiraling bun unraveling, another a comb snapped in 2. A third shows a braid tied around a flame. You think of all the rituals you've seen so far, the sacred oils, the moon-shaped knots, the parting rulers and ghost marriages. Yet none of them feel quite as intimate as this. There's a brush beside the shrine, worn its handle smooth from generations of nervous hands. You take it and run it gently through your hair. The strokes are quiet, slow, deliberate, and then you find a single frayed end, just one. It's not dramatic. You don't whisper any secrets, but you trim it, drop it into the offering bowl, and watch as the flame licks it into memory. You're not alone either. From the shadows, a pair of elderly attendants emerge, each carrying a tiny braid wrapped in silk. They bow to the shrine, make their offering, then turn back without a word. In the past, such rituals were shrouded in secrecy. It was considered unseemly to acknowledge failure. But here, under moonlight and jasmine, the Temple of Burnt Ends offers a quiet rebellion, a place where even perfect hair could admit imperfection. There's an old belief passed between palace stylists in hushed tones that every hair you lose here becomes a thread in the next life's tapestry. That when you are reborn, your spirit wears those regrets like embroidery on the inside of your soul. Whether it's true or just poetic coping, you don't care. The fire is warm, and your head feels lighter, not just literally. As you rise to leave, the lantern-bearer stops you and places a tiny carved charm in your hand. It's shaped like a comb, barely the size of your thumb. For when you need to forget, she says, or perhaps for when you're ready to remember. You nod, and the two of you walk back toward the palace, the flame lighting your steps through the damp grass. Behind you, the fire glows on quietly, tending to the broken strands of those who dared to let go. The next morning, you wake to the sound of crows squabbling outside the eastern gate, and the slow clang of a bronze bell echoing through the palace's tiled halls. It's the kind of morning where the humidity clings to your skin before your feet even touch the floor. Someone brings you tea cold, thank goodness, and informs you that today you'll be attending a hair viewing. You blink. A what? You'll see the attendant says cryptically, already walking away. Soon, you're led to a small, sunlit pavilion just beyond the concubine's garden. It smells of fresh, thatch pine resin, and something faintly floral, perhaps. Magnolia. A semicircle of courtiers is gathered beneath a painted awning, their expressions ranging from delight to veiled dread. At the center of the space, seated in a carved sandalwood chair, is a figure of modest stature, but overwhelming presence, Prince Tokroy. Yes, that's what they call him, Prince Tangled Hair, a living legend of the late 17th century, and his name not symbolic. He earned it the literal way. He has not combed his hair in 42 years, and now he's decided to reveal it. The attendants pull back the silk veil that's been hiding his head, and you try very hard not to gasp. His hair is vast, voluminous, a living monument to neglect and stubbornness. It hangs in twisted coils, some as thick as your wrist, others knotted like abandoned fishing nets. Stray ribbons of incense ash tree bark and possibly bird feathers cling to it like decorations. It spills over the back of the chair, pooling onto the floor like a glossy sentient animal. The room is silent except for one woman who quietly mutters, "That's impressive," in the tone usually reserved for witnessing miracles or failed soufflés. Prince Tokroy, for his part, beams with pride. His voice is dry as dried papaya. "I have not touched a comb since the day of the split peach," he announces. No one knows what that means, but several people nod respectfully. Historians still argue whether the prince's refusal to comb his hair was political, spiritual, or simply the result of a dramatic breakup. One popular theory claims that after being denied the throne, he declared grooming a tyranny of vanity and vowed never to part his hair again. Another version suggests he fell in love with a forest spirit who told him his soul would remain intact only if his hair remained tangled like the wild. Whatever the reason, he made good on the promise. For decades he lived on the palace fringes, attending only essential ceremonies, and otherwise roaming the gardens, muttering philosophical questions to turtles. Yet no one dared cut his hair, not even the stylists. Instead, once a year, they conducted the ritual of the gentle pat, where they would solemnly press his locks between silken cloths and bow 3 times. No oil, no scissors, no judgment. And here's the strange thing, his hair became revered. Commoners believed it had absorbed the palace's deepest truths, that each knot trapped a whisper, a secret, a forgotten name. Lovers would sneak into the outer gardens and tie silk threads into his trailing strands, hoping their wishes would be entangled forever. A poet once wrote a verse, his hair a map of sorrows, each tangle a love never named. You inch a little closer now, not out of morbid curiosity, but genuine awe. Up close, the mass looks almost sculptural, textured and woven by time itself. You can see bits of faded ribbon woven into one section, perhaps from a festival decades ago. Another portion is matted so thoroughly it resembles lacquered stone, and yet somehow it doesn't smell. Or rather, it smells faintly of sandalwood, clove, and rain-soaked earth. Someone's been keeping the worst of the rot at bay. Perhaps the prince's personal herbalist, or an unseen army of lizard folk. You wouldn't be surprised either way. You sit cross-legged as the viewing continues. One courtier recites a haiku. Another offers a plum wine toast in honor of uncombed wisdom. A palace scribe reads aloud a list of objects that have at some point been removed from the prince's hair, including, but not limited to, a jade earring, 3 prayer beads, a very confused cricket, and a finger-sized flute carved from melon rind. A stylist leans over and whispers, "We once found a dream in there." You're not sure what that means, but you believe her. Eventually, the ceremony winds down. Prince Tokroy stands, his hair dragging gently behind him, like a bridal train crafted by a windstorm. He nods to the assembly, his eyes twinkling. "May your knots be worthy," he says, and disappears behind a curtain of beaded strings and moths. You remain for a while, staring at the empty chair, the faint impression his weight left on the cushion, the single strand of silver hair that glimmers in the sun like a thread of forgotten time. There's a peace to him, a boldness, yes, but also a surrender to nature, to age, to the lovely mess of being human. And you think maybe that's what made him a prince after all. Later that day, your hair still neatly coiled, though now feeling woefully bland, compared to the legendary locks of Prince Tokroy, you're summoned to witness something far more ceremonial and far more absurd. It's the Rebellion Commemoration Parade, a grand annual affair that honors a very specific event from the early 1400s, a dramatic but short-lived uprising known for being defeated mostly by poor weather, a misread map, and a collapsing bridge. Still, the palace insists on commemorating it with style. And style in this case means wigs. Yes, wartime wigs. You're seated in the shade beneath a silk canopy as the first wave of performers comes into view. They march in formation, bearing bamboo replicas of historical weapons, all while balancing headpieces so elaborate they defy logic. You expected helmets. What you get are towering structures of hair, shaped like phoenixes, lotus thrones, even boats. The men wear stylized military wigs, made from a combination of horsehair lacquered palm fibers and boiled rice glue. They're heavy. They creak. One nearly tips off as a dancer makes an overzealous turn, prompting a frantic rescue by a nearby attendant, wielding a hidden chopstick. Then come the symbolic wigs, a pile of bamboo coils, shaped to look like fortress walls. A wig designed to resemble a smoldering campfire, complete with hints of cinnamon incense, and red silk ribbons waving like smoke. One particularly bold look, a rotating windmill bun, representing strategic failure. You can't make this stuff up. These weren't created to flatter. They were historical recreations, meant to showcase not just battlefield roles, but social positions, betrayals, and even surrender. The woman portraying a defecting general's wife wears a wig, styled like a fallen tower, cleverly crumbling on one side, held up by sticks that resemble broken oaths. You're told these wigs take weeks to build. Some even require inner bamboo skeletons, flexible frames woven with such precision that they can withstand mild weather and the occasional pigeon landing. The palace wig-makers, known as the topknot, are trained not just in aesthetics, but structural engineering. One scroll describes their techniques in almost architectural terms. The weight must pull evenly from the central spiral. Otherwise, the wearer shall list like a drunken boat. Historians still argue whether these wigs were ever worn in real battles or merely used in reenactments. Some evidence suggests that high-ranking generals may have worn lightly constructed versions during formal parades to distract or impress enemy spies. One particularly bizarre case mentions a commander whose towering wig caused such confusion among a rival clan that they mistook him for a deity and retreated. Briefly, back in the parade, a small contingent now enters wearing rain wigs. These were waterproof styles made of tightly packed rice stalks, waxed paper, and goose feathers. You watch as a boy in costume tilts his head, and water rolls right off like it's bouncing off a thatched roof. Genius, but nothing compares to the pièce de résistance, the ceremonial rebellion wig, known as Vuong Hua Tok, the king's flame. It rises nearly 3 feet above the performer's head, shaped like a flaming torch, with dyed yak hair cascading down the sides, and crimson ribbons flickering from its peak. The wig is rigged with a gentle mechanism, an inner fan, powered by winding thread, which causes the ribbons to tremble, as if they're alive. When it first appears, the crowd goes silent. Not out of reverence, but because everyone's worried it might burst into actual flames. It doesn't. Mostly. A nearby stylist leans toward you. Last year the fan snapped and the entire crown whipped into the tea cart. We lost 3 teacups and a perfectly good papaya. This year, however, all goes smoothly. The wig-bearer bows slowly, gracefully, impossibly, and you swear you feel a gust of wind ripple through the fabric of time. Of course, there's a practical side to this ridiculous display. After the rebellion, the court used wigs to mask the identities of political defectors who had returned to the capital under imperial pardon. Wearing an elaborate hairpiece, they could attend court functions without revealing their freshly grown-out exile hair, or the shame of having once sported a merchant's haircut. One entry in a stylist's diary reads, "Madame L. returned from the southern hills, ashamed of her farmer's braid. We gave her a phoenix crown and a fake widow's peak. She now eats dumplings with the emperor's sister. And then there's the famous rebel-turned-poet Hua Van Kai, who refused any wig upon his return. 'Let my scalp speak for itself,' he declared. It was bald naturally. He later became a monk. As the parade ends, and the performers bow, you feel an odd wave of affection for these gravity-defying monuments to historical vanity, because what better way to remember a failed rebellion than by wearing a half-kilogram of flammable artistry on your head? The sun begins to set as you rise from your seat. The air smells of sweat incense and scorched resin. A child runs past wearing a miniature wig shaped like a water buffalo, trailing laughter and melted beeswax. You smile, because here in this palace of absurd elegance, even defeat is remembered with hair. The moon is high now, fat, luminous, and lounging comfortably above the palace rooftops, like a cat full of secrets. You walk slowly along the outer courtyard path, your sandals brushing against loose petals, blown in from the orchid garden. After the noise and heat of the rebellion parade, the air is wonderfully cool, and the scent of the night is heavy, with damp stone rice husks, and something floral, and slightly fermented. A low door creaks open. A hand beckons. You follow naturally, because in this world mystery always leads to hair. You're ushered into a candlelit chamber walls, draped in soft muslin, the floor padded with straw mats, and the occasional jade footrest. In the center, a long, shallow trough, carved from stone, and filled with steaming lavender rice wine. Floating in it are strands of royal hair, some dark, some silver, some dyed, a shocking marigold. You welcome to the Twilight Dye House. Tonight is no ordinary hair ritual. It's the turn of the season, and tradition dictates that select members of the court undergo the dyeing of the crown, a symbolic renewal. But unlike modern dyes, this process involves concoctions brewed in near alchemical secrecy. You're handed a cup of warm wine, this one for drinking thankfully, and gently guided to a reclining bench by two stylists in loose indigo robes. Tonight, we use the good blend, one of them whispers, infused for 8 moons, filtered through banana leaves, blessed by 3 mildly sober monks. They begin by combing your hair with fingers soaked in lotus root extract, muttering incantations meant to purify last season's regrets. Then comes the paste, thick, cool and deep violet in hue. It smells of basil star anise, and a faint undernote of caramel. Historians still argue whether these dyes were invented for beauty or spiritual hygiene. Some say they originated during the reign of Queen Thuk-Trin, who believed silver streaks in hair allowed ghosts to whisper too close. Others point to trade records showing imports of indigo from distant hills, prized not for color, but for its ability to confuse demons with style. Tonight's dye is said to stabilize the chi of the forehead. It's applied slowly, massaged into the roots in spiral motions, as if coaxing secrets from your scalp. You close your eyes. You float. Somewhere near your elbow, a stylist begins humming. You recognize the tune. It's an old lullaby about a girl who dyed her hair so boldly, the moon got jealous and hid for 2 weeks. The others join in harmonizing between brushstrokes. And yes, brushstrokes. After the initial paste is applied, your hair is painted with literal calligraphy brushes. A fringe is shaped like a lily. A crown braid is edged with streaks of charcoal ink. It's less about permanence and more about poetry. Each noble chooses their dye based on personal symbolism. Green tea for patience and good harvest. Tamarind paste for forgiveness. Black sesame ash to mourn lost love. Fermented rice wine and beetroot for flirtatious mischief, popular among poets. You notice the woman next to you has a streak of burnt orange near her ear. A bold choice. She catches your eye, shrugs, and whispers, "My mother-in-law's visiting." You nod. Say no more. Even male courtiers partake, especially those navigating political transition. A thin, nervous man nearby is having his entire hairline inked with mulberry root dye, said to improve clarity in court debates. Judging by the number of touch-ups, clarity has been evasive. As the dye sets, you're wrapped in soft silk and offered pickled ginger, wrapped in mint leaves, a traditional post-dye palate cleanser. You chew slowly, wondering whether you're being spiritually cleansed or just excellently snacked. A stylist returns with a small mirror made from polished bronze. It's curved so your reflection seems to float like a spirit above your shoulders. The dye has darkened your hair to a warm chestnut, with subtle highlights catching the candlelight, like river eddies. It's quietly majestic, or at least vaguely hydrated. You're told not to wash it for 3 days. Not because it'll fade, but because the scent must carry your intention through the week. You nod, committing to smell vaguely of sweet basil and mischief. Until Tuesday, the stylists offer you a small cloth pouch inside a sample of the very dye they used preserved in beeswax and wrapped in violet rice paper. In case you ever forget who you became tonight, one whispers, and just like that, the session ends. You step back into the courtyard, hair still damp, spirits impossibly high. The moon greets you again, this time with a knowing glint. You breathe deep. The palace hums with distant laughter, the rustle of fans, the hush of brushed silk. And your hair, freshly dyed and full of meaning, shifts gently in the breeze, like it knows a secret you haven't quite remembered yet. You walk on into the garden of sleep. Now just take a breath. Let the palace fall away. Let the dye house close its doors. The candles flicker out, the rice wine cool into silence. The hairstylists are folding their linens. The brushes are rinsed. Even the moon seems to be tucking itself behind a slow-moving cloud. You're standing in a garden. Real or not, it doesn't matter. The stone path is warm beneath your feet. The trees murmur gently overhead. Maybe it's a banyan. Maybe a fig tree. It smells faintly of sandalwood, and something you can't name, but recognize all the same. You touch your hair, still soft, still scented with ancient rituals. But there's no weight now, no knots, no coils tugging at your scalp. Just the steady whisper of breeze through strands that feel like river water, like memory. Somewhere in the distance, a bell tolls once. Not a warning, not a summons. Just a reminder that time flows gently. And you, tired, tangled, and quietly content, are floating now. Back through corridors of whispering silk, past the temple of burnt ends, past the tangled throne of Prince Tokroy, past the silent braid of the ghost bride, and into a stillness beyond. Your breathing slows. The world softens. Whatever burdens you brought here tonight, judgments, tangles, heavy thoughts, they don't follow you. They've been braided up, tucked behind your ear, or dropped quietly into an old fire pit at the edge of the mind. You are allowed to sleep now, and if you dream, let it be of rice fields under starlight, of combs carved from kindness of winds that knot nothing but leaves. Good night, friend.